Hello, I am Brad Scott and this is my art. Today I'm going to be inking this Batman sketch that I did, and this is actually the first work I'm doing today. So typically I usually start off with sketches, pencil sketches to kind of warm up, get my arms and fingers loose. So since this is the first thing I'm doing today, I'm not going to just jump right into inking, because if I mess it up, well, then it's messed up for good. So what I'm going to do instead is just come here and just get a little bit loose with some sketching. It's not a formal process that I do or anything. It's just making sure that my hands are loose and limber, especially as I get older. Also making sure my neck and shoulders are pretty loose, and every now and then, let me see if I can find a sample. You know, when I'm warming up, I'll just do quick little sketches like that, things that don't necessarily mean anything, but just like here I just did a quick eye study just to get loosened up. And a lot of times when I practice, I'll do the sphere, the cube, and the pyramid just to get loose. But sometimes I just come in and I'll just do, you know, some strokes, making sure that I have control. Maybe I'll do some quick cross hatching, making sure I can do parallels. If I want to do something real quick, maybe I'll do a quick eyeball. And I love doing the sphere, the cube, pyramid, bring in the light. Nothing too fancy, just making sure I'm loose and that my hands are good to go. So I'm feeling pretty good. So I'll go ahead and just jump right into inking. What I'm going to be using today is a bunch of stuff. So I've got my set of microns, and I'm trying to keep them in order of size. I also have my Copics, 1 microns, my Faber-Castell, and I also have my Pentel brush pen, and I've got a couple of white. I've got the Jelly Roll, and I also have the Signo Uniball. So that's what I'll be using. And I haven't decided. I've been looking to do more colored pencils lately. But today I think I'm going to just focus on the inks for this piece. And I'm not sure where I'm going to go with it yet. So I'm going to do the outline, the main outline, in a bold 1. And I actually started this a little bit before I decided to go ahead and, it's like, wow, I haven't filmed in a while. I should probably film this. As I mentioned before, I don't try to get too rigid with my lines. I try to keep them sketchy. And by sketchy, I mean some of the short strokes broken up a little bit. so I can get different line weights. Now when it comes to skin, usually when there's exposed skin, then I will try to smooth that out just a little bit and make it a nice flow to give it a little bit of contrast from man-made materials. Again, I'm not looking at this as a tutorial, but just more of a demo of my process. I've really got to start thinking of topics. I always say that I'm going to start thinking of topics to talk about while I draw, and then I don't do it. And then once I get to drawing, I'm like, what should I talk about? I do want to talk a little bit about materials. So for example, I just showed you all what I will be using to ink this piece today. And I remember when I first started, the first question I had for a lot of pros and some of the advanced artists that I knew was, what tools do you use? And it was always the same answer. One, it doesn't matter. It's whatever you feel comfortable using. But at the same time, you want to get something that you're comfortable with, and depending on what you plan to do with the art. So for example, this piece here I will probably sell. So I want to make sure that the ink I use is archival, and the microns, Faber-Castells, the brush pen, they're all archival, meaning they won't fade and they'll hold up over time. And I think that's important if you're looking to sell a piece. You don't want it fading out on somebody. So for example, I could have just kept it at a pencil sketch and used graphite to add some tones. Me personally, if I did that, then I would probably seal it afterwards with some type of shellac or coating, so that the graphite itself wouldn't fade over time, and that the person who paid for it would have a drawing that would last them a long time. But for sketching and practice and just in my sketchbook, I don't worry about using the archival pens. So for example, I will use, do I have one up here? I'll use a tool, pencil, or pen. I'll use a pilot in my sketchbook just to get some ink down and try different patterns and things like that. They'll last a long time. They're not necessarily considered archival, but they're really good to get some practice in and see what's going on. So with this one that I'm using, this Micron 1, and by that I mean the size of it, it's a 1, as opposed to maybe like an 03 or an 08 or something. This is a 1. I'm hitting the outlines of the major elements of the drawing. So the general shape of the helmet, neck, cowl, cape, chest, and arms. And then when I get into the inner lines and contours, I'll use a smaller weight, which I'll be switching here in just a second. That looks good. Also, while I'm doing this with the one, I'll hit major areas that I know I want to draw attention to. So for example, the main line of the mouth. The lips I will do on a smaller line, but that main line I want to be a thick line. Also, the main line over his eyes. I want that to be a nice thick line. And I think from there, bat symbol. And I'm actually know ahead of time that I'm going to color that in solid black. So I don't necessarily use the sketchy line. I just give myself a nice solid line to drop in some color on. And also I think, no, I'm going to leave it at that. I think those are the major elements that I want to hit. And then I'll drop down to an 08. And I'll hit some of the secondary elements that I want to draw attention to. So his neck brace here. So this is a medium-sized line, not as thick as the one, but it'll be thicker than some of the other details that I'll be dropping in. There's no right or wrong way on how to do this. There's times when maybe you want all the line weights to be the same. That's definitely a style. There's time when you want varying line weight. There's time when you want to use your brush pen and get some very different contours going on and continuous line weight differences. I also think I'm going to make these more like plates on his armor, not just shadows or a suit, but I want this to be more like a solid armor. Sort of like this shoulder pad here. I want it to be armored. And then there's a couple of armor pads over here. One of the hardest things for me over the past couple of years has been getting to a point where I'm comfortable inking. One of the mistakes I made when I first started inking, because I've been sketching for a long time, but then dropping in inks, I was always a little bit nervous. And then one of my friends told me one day, he said, you have to trust your inks. And I am slow. And now I'm going to drop down to an 03. I'm a little bit slower. So what I do is Here it might seem like I'm going relatively quickly, but that's because I didn't go with a super tight pencil, but I went with a tighter pencil than a lot of artists have to go with, because they're just basically better at laying things out once they have their foundation and guidelines for what they want to do with the piece. For me, I don't have to go so tight as to drop in all of the lines and shadows that I want in the final piece, but I have to be tight enough to know exactly where everything is going to be. And I can't just eyeball it with the inks at this point in my talent structure, basically. I would like to get to a point where I can be a little bit looser on the pencils and then go straight to inks, because that'll make me a little bit faster. But I'm not rushing that part, because if I rush it, then I'm just going to come up with ugly inks that I can't use. The cool thing about the pencils is they erase. So anytime I'm working a layout, if I don't like it, I just erase. Like on this Batman piece, I erased a lot, or I put in a lot of lines that I know I don't want as I build up to a foundation that I do want. So for example, you can see here, you know, I looked at putting that jaw in 3 different places before I actually decided on this last one here, but I was experimenting throughout this whole piece here. Same thing with the ears. I experimented with a bunch of different lines before I finally decided and settled on that line. And that's kind of how I do it now. I don't think there's any right or wrong. I think it's basically just, you have to look at your skill set, your individual skill set, and do what's best for you. At the end of the day, you're still just looking at it's paper, it's pencil, it's ink. If you need to throw it away, you can throw it away, or you can keep it. I keep a lot of sketches and drawings even after I ink them if they go bad, just because sometimes I look at them later to figure out if I can fix them as my skill set gets better. Sometimes I can rescue a drawing, sometimes I can't, and so I kind of look at and highlight the pieces that I didn't do so well and make notes on them, so I can, almost like a self-critique, saying, you know, don't do this again, or next time I do this, do it a different way. If you notice this little arrow up here, I always do this to remind me of which way the sunlight, or not sunlight, but light period, is going to come. So I'm going to say lighting is coming from this direction, and as I start working through this whole thing until I get some shadows in place, it's a reminder of me of when I'm starting to lay down inks where I should and should not be inking. And then as the piece starts to come together and it becomes obvious where the light is coming from, then I'll go ahead and erase that piece up top and clean up the drawing a little bit. But in the beginning, when I'm just doing the contours, there's not a whole lot of way to tell which direction the light is coming from. When I'm going to black in a whole piece, I'll do a little squiggly line inside of it like that. That just reminds me that all gets blacked in. Some artists will put a small X that shows, hey, this whole section gets blackened. I used to do the X because that's the way I learned when I started inking, but then as I started with different materials, experimenting with different materials, sometimes the X shows through depending on the materials that you're using, and I'm like, wow, that looks really distracting to just see that little faded X under the inks. And then it made me wonder for my own piece. I'm like, why is that X there? Because if the squiggly line shows, well, it's okay. And it's not distracting, basically. Hopefully now you can see how the different line weights play out and highlight different things. And with as I go smaller, I can use much more of a sketchy style, like there, as opposed to some of the solid outlines that I use in some of the other areas. And I like that just because I think it adds a dynamic element to the drawing. For the cape here, this part is cape. So I did the main outline with the 1, but then inside where you would see the folds of the cape, I'm going to use the brush pen and try to get more of some flowing lines with varying line weight. And keep them nice and smooth. Like such. And then I'm going to go ahead and start erasing some of the graphite, picking up some of the graphite off of here. That's the main contour. That's done. I think it's looking pretty good. And actually, no, there's one more line I want to put in here, and that is for the ears. I'm going to bring that over just a little bit. I might blacken that in a little bit, and I might make that line a little bit darker. Okay. And actually, a few more details. I want to make sure I don't lose. I kind of like that. I might do something with that. And then I'll just start picking up the graphite. And I usually go all over just because it smudges as I was drawing. So I clean it all up. And I kind of messed up that lip. I should have erased that line because that's not the line that I wanted. I actually wanted the line underneath that. That's okay. I'll figure out how to deal with that a little bit later. I think because of the way the angle it is, I'll be able to just use a solid black somewhere and fix that up, no problem. The other good thing about some of the pens, some take a while to dry, which means you can't erase until it's dry. So the Icons dry pretty quick. That's no problem. The brush pens take a little bit longer because, of course, it's more ink. But you can kind of just look at it and tell. But you don't want to start running an eraser across it until you get it's dry, or you don't care if it smudges. No, depending on what it is. If these lines smudged a little bit in the cape, for example, maybe I don't mind as much because that's going to be some area of shadow anyway. Definitely inside the bat symbol, I don't care because that's definitely going to be solid. But for the most part, I try to not do any smudges. And it's also why I use a kneaded eraser instead of the white vinyl eraser. That white vinyl eraser smudges and lifts up the ink a lot more than the kneaded eraser does. I'm heavy-handed, and so I tend to put down heavier pencil lines. So I've been kind of training myself to be a little bit gentler on the pencil lines so I don't have to erase as hard when it's time to pick up the graphite. Because I was smudging a lot. I was smudging stuff all over the place, and I was just like, oh my god, how can I fix this? And sometimes I could, sometimes I couldn't. There's a lot of drawings I have that have some really dark, deep shadows, not because they were planned, but because I smudged them so bad. There was no way to do it but to just shadow it out. Otherwise, the drawing would have just been ruined, and that's fine. You know, again, like I said, again, at the end of the day, it's just pen, pencil, and paper. So if you need to redo something, the only thing you've invested into it really is your time. And while your time is valuable, it's not the end of the world. So now that's cleaned up, you know, the contours look really nice. I like the way those came out. And so I'll start cleaning things up. Just some of the lines here and there that I want to make sure before I get too deep into the piece. That's a little bit too jagged, so I'll smooth that out a little bit. Just add a little bit of line weight to it. I like the way that came out. Okay. I'll go ahead and start dropping in some of these dark shadows that I know I want. And actually I need my backdrop paper here as I get closer to the edge so I don't mess up my drawing board more than it already is. So for example, places like down here where I know I want that to be deep shadow, coarse shadow. This keeps me from getting ink all over my drawing board. One, it doesn't dry as fast on the drawing board, and two, as the drawing board gets more and more ink on it, the paper doesn't slide around as easily on it. So for example, big spots like this get kind of sticky, and as I'm sketching, you know, I'm always sliding the paper around to get the right angle for my hand, and so I don't like getting it too tacky from the ink. Switched over to one of the Faber-Castell brush pens, which I really love. I actually think this one is, I don't know how much life is left in this one. I've been using it for a while now. I know it's going to die on me one day, like right in the middle of a large black area. It's just going to die on me, and I'm going to have to switch, and then the ink's not going to match. Normally when I'm doing a large area like that, I try to make sure that I have enough of whatever pen I'm using so that it won't be a mismatch. I did that once or twice or a few times on a piece where a pen went dry and I had to use a different type of pen to finish, and then it just didn't match. Although now I keep enough of the different types of pens that I use, I can just grab another one. Although I think this is the last Faber-Castell that I have. I'm gonna have to pick up some more of those. But they make a really nice brush pen. And the tip is starting to get beat up pretty bad now. But that's what I really look for, is one of the pens that can hold up to the abuse. Give you a nice broad line when you need it, but the tip kind of stays intact. So when you want to go a little bit finer, you can. And see, I just messed up right there. Went outside the line. But that's not a big deal. I will find a way to correct that. Probably just by extending the wing over it. Done. The first time I tried to do a couple of these videos, you get so engrossed into what you're doing, the video just becomes silent, which I think a lot of, or the reason why a lot of artists recently, at the time of this video anyway, have gone to the format where they're live streaming at the same time they're recording, so that they can take questions from the viewers, which I think is an awesome way to do it, an awesome idea. I'll need to get my setup done a little bit more. Right now I only have one camera and one phone holder and one computer. So depending on whether I'm taping at home or in my art studio, the equipment is split between the two places. So I don't have a place where everything is set up to do live streaming and be able to see questions and take questions from the field and that type of thing. So that's the main pieces that I know are going to be black. Now it's just time to kind of play with it and see what else I want to do. I like working, since I'm right-handed, I'll kind of work from the upper left to the bottom right so as to not smear. But as I get more into it, I find myself jumping around to different places, trying to pop it out, and so I'll do the rotation to keep from smearing. So for example, if I'm doing something here, I don't want to cross over and then take the chance on smearing what I just did. So I'll kind of angle the paper a little bit. I want to add a little bit of dimensionality to these ears. This pen's getting dry. I can see it, you can see it, and you can hear it. You know, when you hear it, the more you hear it, the more the drier it's getting. And that's what that's an indication of, is that the pen is drying out. I'm actually going to go ahead and just make that a smooth. I was going to fade or do a gradient, but I'm not. I think those are the biggest areas. I'm just going to pick out a few areas that I think would be really nice to have a core shadow in. Remembering that light direction is this way. So if I'm looking at the arm, And this is a pad. This is a armored piece over the shoulder. Right up under that armored piece would definitely be some core shadows. Let me check time real quick. I'm going to go ahead and do this one as well. Try to add some separation for the cape. This brush pen is one of my favorite tools now. When I first started using the Pentel brush pen, because just to show you a real quick difference on brush pens. So I'm going to show you 3 different ones. So here's your Faber-Castell brush pen, and it's got a pretty nice tip on it, but it's a solid piece of felt. And the tip is relatively blunt, although this one's just beat all to be damned. And then this is the Micron brush pen, and it's a much finer point, but it's felt and the tip just doesn't last as long. But these are great pens, especially when they're new and the tips are nice, and they're nice. If you have a softer hand, your tips will last a long time. I'm heavy-handed, so my tips don't, which is why I love the Pentel brush pen, because these are individual pieces. This is not one piece, and it's almost like a paintbrush. And so you get a paintbrush feel to the line that you're using. That makes it very easy to get thin and thick strokes. So if I want some nice thin strokes, I can get them. And then if I want thicker strokes, I can get them. And then if I want a dynamic, I can get it. So I love it, absolutely love it. I can do a nice little trim along the edge. And then use the same brush to color in some of the larger areas. This has also helped me not be so heavy-handed. And it gives me a little bit of control as I build that up. And if I have a very large area to do, depending on how deep I want the black, I'll pull out the India ink and an actual paintbrush, and I'll paint using the India ink. So I like the way that's coming out, and get some separation between the cape and the cowl. And I also want to add a little bit to the arm and shoulder. Bottom of this plate here, give it a little dimensionality. I want to get under the neck, but I probably should have did that earlier, because now I can't lay my hand here, and I don't want to angle the paper in the wrong direction, do that. So while I let that dry, I'll work on some other areas. Now I'm just kind of playing with the shadows to see what areas can pop from maybe a little more core shadow. And in some of the areas, like on the opposite side here, I'll leave a little white space to indicate a rim light. And if I know I want to do it, sometimes I'll just leave that little space there to indicate the rim light. And if I decide after the fact, then I'll use one of my white pens, paint pens, to go ahead and get that done that way. And I want to get, so there'll be a little bit of shadow under the helmet here. Not much, because the light's actually coming from that direction. And then as we come down this way, it'll be a little bit more as his chin and jaw create the shadow. I'm debating on whether or not to put this whole side of the cape in a dark black, and I'm thinking that's what I want to do, but I'm not 100% sure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just play with it and see if I like it, and leave a little bit of white space and just kind of build up without going too far. And just keep adding until I get what I desire. And that little sliver makes the arm look funky, so I'm going to go ahead and fill it in. And again, if I want to add a little separation later, I can do that with one of my white paint pens. And I like that. And I think I'm going to add a little bit more around the cape, like such. I like that. Now this side of his helmet would have a deep core shadow to it, but because I think I'm going to use some colored pencils on that, I don't want to use the paint on it. And actually, I want to add to this neck brace here, I want to add a little dimensionality. So on this side there'll be some shadow, and then underneath, and then the top is exposed to the light. I like that. And actually, ooh, see, there's a smear right there. Now sometimes, if you find it quick enough, you can actually pick it up with an eraser. I'm not even sure how I just smeared that, and I just did it, but I smeared it. So if you get to it quick enough, you can pick it up. So I was able to pick up a little bit of it, but it's still a smear. And I'll have to figure out, maybe I'll make that some damage. And actually that's a good thing to do. So now I'm going to go with the smallest one I have here, the 005, which I don't like using. The tip is so small on it, and I'm so heavy-handed that I always wind up pushing the tip into the pen. So these are not even a great investment for me particularly. But when I take my time and do what I want, it comes out really nice. And what I want to do is add maybe some battle damage to the helmet. You know, he's taking some bumps and bruises, some scrapes over time, right? Maybe he's taking one to the jaw. Took a lump in the back of the head, into the medulla oblongata. Give it a little, maybe he took one to the nose at one time. Give it a little, wow, I've got something on my hand. That's where it's coming from. So I wound up getting some ink on my hand, and now I'm just dropping it all over the place. Way to go, Brad. Which is one of the reasons why I actually usually wear a glove. And I don't know, I think I put my art glove away. But I usually wind up wearing a glove. And this is actually one of the gloves I use for digital. But I'll wear it to prevent smearing ink from my hand all over the place. But that's okay. I can fix it. I'm just glad I caught it before I went too far. I was like, where are these new spots coming from? And whenever that happens, I know there's only one other person in here besides me, and that's me. So if it's coming from anywhere, it's coming from me. That's fine. Because I'm almost done here with the inking, which is what I wanted to do. And I'm going to take my 03, and just kind of play with areas of shadow that aren't coarse shadow, but I still want a little bit of gradient and separation. So again, light's coming down from this direction here. That means part of this arm, maybe all of this arm, is going to have some type of shadow on it, especially with the cape covering it up. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and just drop some crosshatch in there. And I'm going to use I'm going to make sure the crosshatch follows the shape of the bicep and the forearm. That'll give me a little shadow there. Right underneath the chest plate. I want a little shadow there. And I'm just going to use the parallel lines. I'm not going to cross hatch that area because I don't want it as intense as that area that's all the way under shadow. Right up in here. I want to add a little gradient. On this neckband here, I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of love to that to give it some shape as well as dimensionality. That's not even a word. I just love saying dimensionality. I know what it means. I think you know what it means. I have no idea whether it's an actual word, but adding dimension, I'm going to say it is a word, and it means to add dimension. So that I'm not just looking along the X and the Y, but I'm looking along the Z axis as well. Okay. And that also creates a little bit of separation from that piece back there. Underneath this eye, okay. I think I'm going to do something right on the edge of this plate here to make it look more like an edge. And on this edge, it'll get deeper as it goes away from the light. This edge kind of follows the light until you get up around the corner up underneath here. And this I want to show as a separate piece. So I've got the cow, and this is kind of like another piece. And I think I want to do something with color to make those separations. That's all in light, so I think I want to do something with color there. The cow here, I'm going to leave a little spot for rim light on this side, but I want to kind of indicate that it's in the shadow and it has a curve to it. Now I'm just using some flow lines to kind of indicate the shape. And I'll do some under the mask here, under the jowls. Now at this point, I honestly think I could probably call it done as a pen and ink sketch and be good with it. One thing I know now is I've got a good, once I have this much ink down, it's pretty obvious which direction the light's coming from, so I don't need this anymore. Make sure I clean it up from any loose graphite. There I go, smearing again. Look at that. I don't even know where that smear came from. Oh my God. But that one I did see right away, so I can clean that out real quick. And I need to wash my hands and get whatever ink is on there off. But I think that's a good inking session right there. And I think next I'm going to go ahead and experiment with some colored pencils, some skin tones, some blacks and grays, maybe a little bit of blue, and then come back with the white pen. And I'm going to make that the next video. So this was just a little short inking demo. Again, not necessarily a tutorial, but just kind of showing you some of the methods and tools I use to go through in creating an art piece. I'm probably going to do some type of Gotham background in the back, or maybe even a bat symbol in the back too, but I really want it to, I want to punch out the Batman as much as possible before, and let me take away, there you go, the camera's at a little bit of an angle, so to give you kind of a better look of what it looks like without the angle. because sometimes the angle makes it look funky. So thank you for checking this out. In the next video, I'll be coloring this and maybe adding some background. I'm Brad Scott. This is my art, and thank you for joining me.